Welcome back, Real Sports Science Doctor here again. Today we're reviewing someone else's training and nutrition advice. Specifically, we're reviewing the advice of someone who used to be an absolute beast on the sumo deadlift, for example, and in general just very jacked, and now does YouTube videos for a living. Not that I can speak since, you know. At any rate, I've seen a lot of Greg Doucette's videos pop up on my subscription feed, but to be honest, I haven't really watched many of them. But that changes today. Let's see whether or not his claims actually align with the science on the topic. This video is entitled Build Horseshoe Triceps, Best and Worst Exercises for Optimal Growth. Let's get into it.
After you can't get any more reps, you're done. You can't, it's a struggle, yes. Instead of stopping, you not stopping.
It seems he's about to recommend training past failure, which at this point, I can't say I recommend. We just don't have any evidence on the topic, and while there is a positive relationship between how close to failure, aka actually failing the first rep, goes and hypertrophy, namely, the closer to failure you take a set, the more hypertrophy you get. When it comes to going past that failure point, we just don't have the evidence to support it just yet. But maybe I'm speaking too early here, and maybe he'll go into the video and say something completely different. But that's my take on going past failure.
Okay, the three best, top three. The dip, okay? Dips, but not regular ass dips. You gotta change it up. You can't just throw on a bunch of weights on your belt and stand there and press it any way you like. If you do it like that, you could get injured. It's not being done right. We wanna focus on the triceps and not the chest. The chest is gonna get enough work from everything else you're already doing. So to get focused on the triceps, you have to be vertical. So when you're doing your triceps, you have to stay upright like this, okay? You cannot get into the lean, and a lot of people will do this, okay? If you start leaning forward and pressing, you're changing it into almost like a crossover and your chest is flexing. Don't lean forward. Stay upright. With
regards to not leaning forward to minimize chest involvement, I don't think I really buy into it. It kind of reminds me of the advice for lateral raises of not shrugging up. In reality, the motion of abducting your arm out and the motion of elevating your scapula is going to come hand in hand. I don't think you can really minimize that involvement. Likewise, I think that in the dip, the main thing is just get full elbow flexion range of motion, get a full stretch on the medial and lateral head of the triceps, but the degree to which you lean forward is going to be mostly personal preference and comfort. A lot of people I've coached, when they try and stay upright in the dip, get more joint pain. And so, if you're someone who finds that they have more joint pain when dipping with an upright stance or posture, consider just leaning forward a little bit and see how it feels.
But a lot of people do it wrong. They lean too far forward. They're ego lifting, trying to throw on too many plates on themselves. Oh, I can dip 100 pounds, watch this. And they're cheating and they're using too much shoulder and you can get hurt. You don't want to injure your rotator cuff. You don't want to get your shoulder injured doing a dip exercise. Okay, so it's a great exercise. It's not the number one, but definitely give these a try.
I'm not a fan of the fear mongering here. The truth is that when it comes to different exercises, we just don't have the evidence to say that, oh, this exercise will cause more injury. As long as you ease into an exercise, your body is robust and will adapt to different positions. I think fear mongering, typically all it does is set you up with negative beliefs around pain and injury, where, for example, if you're always taught that, hey, don't round your back during the deadlift because it'll get you hurt, you will develop a belief around the idea that if I round my back during the deadlift or if I end up in spinal flexion in daily life, I will experience pain. And those beliefs are not really helpful when it comes to long-term pain prevention. So I would say don't fall for the fear mongering, see how it feels. In all likelihood, you will be fine, but listen to your body as well. And indeed, I think this is a general stance among physiotherapists. This isn't injury prevention advice or anything like that, but that is just my understanding of where the evidence is at when it comes to the sort of biopsychosocial model of pain.
Number two, tricep press downs. It doesn't matter which bar you use. You can use the straight bar, the rope, the V bar, long rope, short rope. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter what you think.
Use the one that you like. We all have a different anatomy. We're all made a different way. Some of us get elbow pain if we do tricep press downs a certain way. Some of us don't, okay? You need to do these exercises. They're so fundamentally sound in terms of building muscle. It's such an easy and great exercise to do if you have a pulley system.
Well, I agree with the idea that you should use whatever attachment you prefer. There's not a huge difference whether you use a straight bar or rope or like an angled bar. Provided you're getting a full stretch in the triceps and a decent range of motion, you'll probably be fine, as long as it's reasonably stable as well. So if you get pain with one over the other, or you just have a preference for the rope because it looks cool, that's totally fine. However, I don't agree with pushdowns being the second best tricep exercise. I have a whole video on the triceps here that you can check out, but I just don't think they're that good. In fact, I think they're one of the most overrated tricep exercises on account of they only really target the medial and lateral head well. They don't fully lengthen long head. And so if I'm looking for an isolation exercise that is already designed to train the whole triceps very well, it's an isolation exercise where the whole goal is to build specifically the triceps, you may as well pick an exercise that lengthens all three heads effectively. And that would be an overhead extension. By having your arm overhead, you're more effectively lengthening the long head and likely leading to more hypertrophy. Indeed, some research has shown more hypertrophy when training at lower muscle lengths.
Lean forward. Make sure you're leaning forward. Lean forward and don't stop halfway. A lot of people do this wrong. They'll do tricep press downs and they'll go like this. No. Really lock it down as far as you possibly can go.
So I don't think the evidence is there to claim that one, leaning forward does all that much, and two, that you want to get that lockout. If anything, the evidence on lower muscle lengths I just mentioned suggests that potentially missing the lockout part of a movement at short muscle lengths, like the bottom part of a press down, could actually lead to more hypertrophy. And that's something we call lengthened partials. So I would say, don't feel the need to get that bottom half of the rep. If anything, on a lot of movements, I think the bigger mistake people are making is to not get that full stretch.
You want to go to full extension. The triceps really work hard at the end, or the extension, full extension of the arm. If you don't go all the way down, you're certainly missing out.
What's weird to me is that the triceps are involved throughout the whole range of motion, right? They're responsible for elbow extension for the most part, minus the long head also doing shoulder extension. And there's not really any other major elbow extensors, right? So the triceps are involved throughout the whole range of motion, but they're not more involved at lockout during a pushdown. The only thing moving is your elbow. The only thing moving your elbow is your triceps. And that doesn't really change whether you're at lockout or at a more stretched position. I would just like to see a citation for this one claim, but hey.
So if your triceps look like this when you do it, you're not going far enough up. You want to go further ahead. If you're standing too far upright, you're not going to get as much extension as well.
I agree with this. I think missing out on a stretch is a big mistake when it comes to hypertrophy. That being said, I still don't get the idea of leaning forward to get more of a stretch. I think for most pushdowns, most people will be just fine staying upright. You can still get, if you can curl all the way up by standing upright and get a fully flexed elbow, guess what? You can do the same on a pushdown.
Don't overcomplicate things. Yeah, try to keep your elbows to your sides if you can. If you can't, they're to the side. Big deal. It's still going to work the tricep. You can't not work your triceps if you're extending the arm. You can't. If your elbows are out, it's still going to work your triceps. If you get it in tight, you can work the long head a little bit more. But if it hurts, if you get elbow pain, it's not worth it. So remember, comfort is more important than just doing it the most optimal way. If you do it slightly off, you're still going to get 90% of the benefits, and that's a lot better than being injured and getting a zero benefits if you can't do it because you hurt yourself.
Putting aside the fear mongering around you're going to get injured if you do it slightly the wrong way, what have you, I do 100% agree with the idea that, hey, if you have a decent technique, you're getting like 90+% of the gains already. Slight tweaks to your technique aren't going to make that much of a difference. So whenever you're lifting, yes, aim for the best technique possible. But if for some reason, because you're tired or you haven't had the focus or what have you, you find that your technique wasn't actually optimal, don't freak out. It's a very small difference. And indeed, for now, the main pillars of good technique have been summarized in a paper I worked on recently that is on screen right now. Basically, just have a decent tempo, reach long muscle lengths for the muscles involved. Ideally, consider minimizing momentum from other muscle groups, and you'll be most of the way there with technique.
Next, the #1 best exercise you can do for the triceps. It is the Skull Crusher Superset with Close Grip Bench. Okay, very specific. It's not just one exercise, but I call it one exercise because every time I do this, I do it like this. Skull crushers, contrary to the name, we don't want to crush our skulls with the bar. Okay, so typically people would do it like this and lower it to their head and press it up. We don't actually want to do that. We want to lower the bar behind our heads, okay? So if you're laying down on a bench, you're not going to lower it to your head. You're going to lower it behind your head.
So straight up, I don't think this is the best tricep exercise by a long shot, but it's not terrible either. So I think the version of a skull crusher he's recommending here is a strange, hybrid between a skull crusher and an overhead extension, and it kind of resembles a dumbbell skull over, where you do both shoulder extension and elbow extension at the same time. So you are lengthening the long head to a slightly greater extent than you would during a traditional skull crusher, which is good for hypertrophy. However, it's worth noting that going beyond failure by doing your skull crushers and then doing some close grip benching isn't really supported by the evidence. We don't really have evidence on going past failure, and the evidence we have on same muscle group supersets, or essentially supersetting 2 exercises for the same muscle group, don't really suggest there's any additional benefit for muscle growth as compared to just doing traditional straight sets instead.
That'll get you increased range of motion and allow you to just safely do the exercise. You don't want to crush your head. It makes common sense. Common sense, you don't want to crush your head. Behind the head, safer. Also, use an easy bar, not the straight bar. The easy bar allows you to bend your wrist and puts less strain on the wrist.
I think categorical statements like the easy bar allows you to bend your wrist and puts less stress on the wrist is entirely made up, right? There are going to be people who find it more comfortable on their wrists or on their elbows or on their shoulders by using an easy bar versus a barbell. But this categorical statement simply isn't evidenced by any study to my knowledge. Might there be differences on average between, say, the barbell and the easy bar? Let's say you coached 1,000 people. Maybe you found that most of those prefer the easy bar. That's totally fine to claim that on average, most people will prefer the easy bar, but I think making a categorical statement like this just isn't really supported.
So they're bending down, they're going behind their head, it's good, and they go up like this, and then they go all the way up to here. That is pointless. The exercise should stop at eye level. Once you can see that bar, you see it, you stop and go back. You're taking tension off the triceps. It's not working harder than last time anymore. It's just relaxing. It's taking the day off at the top.
Oh man, I've made a whole video on constant tension here, but essentially the idea that you always want tension during the whole set and that's going to be better for hypertrophy, there's just not any evidence to support that claim. Ultimately, whether you keep tension on the muscle the whole time and get fewer reps, or whether you take mini breaks between reps and don't have constant tension, you'll have to do more reps in one case and fewer reps in the other case. But as far as hypertrophy is concerned, we just don't have evidence to say that constant tension is truly better. So while I'm open to the idea that future studies could show that, hey, constant tension training is good for hypertrophy, for now, it's just not something you need to worry about too much.
After you can't get any more reps, you're done. You can't, it's a struggle, yes. Instead of stopping, you're not stopping. You're gonna continue on and press up, okay? So from the side, you've done these exercises, you're all done, and then you press it to the chest and extend like this. So the set gets extended. The close grip bench press, I would have had in my top 3 exercises to do on its own merit. The reason I didn't is because you're already going to be bench pressing for your chest. So the triceps is already getting a significant workout from doing the bench press, especially if you go with the shoulder width grip. The wider you go, the more chest, the more narrow you go, the more triceps, okay? So you're already doing your bench presses to build up your chest. You're already getting some tricep development there. So we're trying to target specifically just the triceps, not do as much of the chest. So that's why I have it like this.
By and large, I do agree with Greg here. I think that the wider you go, the less range of motion you get at the elbow, the less of a stretch you get on the triceps, that's fair enough. With that being said, I still wouldn't have included the close grip bench press in my top 3 tricep exercises, unless you were going predominantly for medial and lateral head growth. Indeed, when you're benching, your long head of the triceps gets lengthened at one joint while being shortened at the other. There's evidence in the hamstrings in the squat, for example, or in the rectus femoris in the squat, for example, that if you're lengthening a muscle at one joint while shortening it at the other, that prevents that exercise from meaningfully stimulating hypertrophy in that muscle. For example, when you're squatting, the hamstrings are shortening at one joint but lengthening at the other. And thus, when you actually look at hamstring growth from squatting, you don't really see any meaningful growth in the hamstrings. The same applies to the long head of the triceps during the bench in all likelihood. And this is why, broadly speaking, compound exercises, with the exception of, for example, a skull over, which actually targets both functions of the long head, allowing it to shorten at both joints at the same time, generally, compound exercises will do a good job with the medial and lateral head that are only responsible for elbow extension, but they typically won't do a very good job when it comes to the long head. And therefore, when it comes to overall tricep growth, the best single choice is going to be an isolation exercise that allows you to lengthen and contract the tricep effectively.
And now the 3 worst tricep exercises to do. In descendingly getting worse order. Overhead dumbbell tricep extensions. So you basically grab the dumbbell, you go behind your head and you press like that, okay? I used to do these, and I used to complain all the time that it hurt my elbow, and I complained all the time because everyone said, you gotta stick your freaking arms to your head, and I couldn't do it. I'm like, I can't do it. I cannot do it. So, you can't just fix your anatomy and say it can do it if you can't do it. Your shoulder's in a more vulnerable position. It's more likely to get hurt.
It's funny, because earlier in the video, Greg is all about individual differences in anatomy and potentially in what causes pain and what doesn't cause pain. And yet here, he's using his own experience, having some pain in his shoulders during overhead extensions, to claim that categorically, for everyone, overhead dumbbell extensions are not a good tricep exercise. But in fact, it seems to be quite the opposite based on the reasons I mentioned earlier in this video. So I'm not disputing that this exercise might not have been ideal for Greg because he got pain from it, but I am disputing the idea that it's the worst exercise because that's simply not true.
And it's simply not as effective as a better version of this exercise, so this way to do it is kind of silly. So instead of doing a vertical tricep extension, there's a better way to do it. Don't do it like this, standing or seated, and you just do that. And look, that's how much my arms are coming out. Too bad, that's what's gonna happen. You need to allow your elbows to come out if it's gonna hurt. You can't just force it to do it, okay? You can't. So the better way to do it, okay, you need to lean back, and do the rock away. You lean back and you do the same motion and you're able to get more extension in the back. So you're able to go further behind. It's going to work the long head even more. The entire tricep's going to get more development. So rather than doing it standing or upright, lean back and do it like that behind your head. Hopefully that makes sense.
So the incline bench here is really just allowing Coach Greg to have his arms a little bit more in front of him, which seems to be more comfortable for him. However, based on how he's doing it here, it does seem to be reducing the stretch on the long head a little bit. That doesn't mean that this exercise is better categorically, just because it allowed Coach Greg specifically to have less pain doing this exercise.
Number 2, the second worst exercise you can do. The tricep kickbacks, and you love doing these. It's so simple, it's right there. Unfortunately, it's not very good at doing anything. It's not gonna put a bunch of muscle mass on your tricep. It's putting your shoulder in a vulnerable position again. You're having to hold yourself up here, and you're trying to kick and swing the weight back.
Every time Coach Greg says a position is vulnerable, take a shot. You'll be wasted by the end of this video. Additionally, I think Greg's thinking here lacks internal consistency, right? Earlier in the video, he's like, don't miss the lockout. That's really where the triceps are working the hardest and where you get a bunch of growth. And yet, when you get to a tricep kickback where with a dumbbell, essentially the only portion of the movement being trained is the lockout, all of a sudden, that doesn't do anything. And so even internally, from one exercise to the next, Greg's thinking doesn't really generalize. It's not consistent. If you can't apply certain principles to your exercise selection, that is a bad sign as a coach.
So you can't use enough weight for this exercise. It's not very effective, and there's so many better choices, so why opt for something suboptimal when there's better choices? So enough with the kickbacks. They're not doing it. It's not hard enough. There's other choices that you can do. I mean, if you're desperate and you love it, so be it. Do it at the end of an exercise or add it on to another exercise as a superset. So you finish your exercise, tricep press downs, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna do these after. Be my guest, but just don't think that it's a mass building, horseshoe building, amazing exercise.
So, I agree with Coach Greg that the kickback is not the best tricep exercise. However, he said a couple things here again. Once again, he said that supersets were a good idea when in reality we just don't have the evidence to claim that they are for hypertrophy. And secondly, more importantly, he's equating the weight you're using for the amount of tension on the triceps for the amount of growth you'll get from it. This line of reasoning doesn't really work because ultimately your muscles don't actually feel how much weight you're using. They feel the tension that they are producing through active tension production, the tension your muscles are producing to lift the weight, and through passive tension, which is the tension your muscles experience as they get lengthened. Importantly, neither of these correlates perfectly with how much weight you're lifting, right? Because different exercises involve different moment arms. So for example, if you're doing a lateral raise like this with your arms very bent versus with your arms very straight, the distance between the axis of rotation, aka your shoulder, and the weight is substantially different. So even if you're using the same weight, the amount of tension being experienced at the muscle level and the amount of hypertrophy it will cause is dramatically different. And so when you're comparing different exercises, you can't just look at how much weight you're lifting and how much hypertrophy that will cause. That's a super reductionist and simplistic way of looking at different exercises and how effective they are for hypertrophy.
The worst tricep exercise you can do for the triceps is this. Have you seen some of these workout videos that these fitness influencers make?
You want to make sure the elbows stay together the entire time, and you will really feel the triceps.
Tricep exercise! Triceps! No! Any exercise that doesn't use weights, a resistance of some sort, is not going to build your muscle. This is not enough to build biceps. This is not enough to build triceps. This is not enough to build freaking delts. No! You need to have a weight. You need to do real lifting. If you can't do all these exercises and you're at home, you can do some wall push-ups. You can work the muscle. If you don't feel it working hard, it's not effective. This is not a frigging tricep exercise. It's lucky to be a stretch. Maybe you could argue it belongs in a yoga class. It is not going to build muscle. Okay? So that's it. The top three worst exercises. Subscribe, click the bell buttons, follow me.
On principle, I agree this is by far not the best tricep exercise. He is right and wrong though about the claim that you need weight to build muscle. Ultimately, what matters to your muscle is that you get sufficiently close to failure in a given set, you're in an effective rep range, you get a stretch on the target muscle, you have a decent tempo on each repetition, and so forth. For certain exercises, there may not be any external weight, like a dip or a push-up, and yet you're still growing muscle potentially optimally. And indeed, for some very untrained or very recreationally trained people, certain movements you just don't use any weight, and they can still be optimal for growth. So again, don't just think that the weight you're using correlates perfectly to how much stimulus you're getting. Anyways, that's my reaction to Coach Greg's takes on the best and worst tricep exercises for hypertrophy. Honestly, overall, I'll give this like a 4. A lot of it is just platitude heavy, where he's heard some stuff in the fitness industry and he's kind of just repeating it verbatim because he's heard it and believes it. And there's not a whole lot of critical thinking or internal consistency in what he's saying, or really a lot of citations to back anything up here. A lot of the thinking is a little bit reductionist to my liking. So for example, assuming that the weight on the bar perfectly correlates to how much stimulus you get. With that being said, his execution of all movements and some of the movements he selected are at least decent. And so I'm not going to give him like a 0, but I think a 4 is pretty appropriate here. It's worth keeping in mind though that this video was released 3 years ago, and at the time we had less evidence on certain things like the stretch, the contracted position, and so forth, and so I am giving him some slack for that, maybe a 5 out of 10. Anyways, no hate at all towards Coach Greg, just my honest review of his take within this video. If you liked the video and would like to see me, a sports scientist, react to any other people within the fitness industry, leave a comment down below letting me know who you want me to react to. That's the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys, my subscribers, in that next one. Peace.